Okay, well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming along, and welcome to the Scottish Parliament, your Parliament. It's lovely to see you all. I'm Rona Mackay, MSP, and I'm the convener of this cross-party group on men's violence against women and children, and I have been since I was elected about 10 years ago. And so today we're hoping to have a thought-provoking and an exciting discussion. And I think it's important that when we're speaking, we treat each other with extreme respect. We may have differing views, but we have to be respectfully at all times. So we're delighted today that you can join us to participate in this, the rise of misogyny, and it's in partnership with the University of Edinburgh. And later on, I'll be inviting you to ask questions and make comments, because this is really about you. But we have our panel here who can set the scene at the start. I'll have a few questions to ask. So really delighted to be joined by Dr. Leah McCabe, Katie Horsburgh and Tasrian Tasmaya MSYP. I'm afraid Dr. Daniel Guinness, who was on the programme, has been taken unwell, so he can't make it today. So I'll start with Leah. Leah's a lecturer in British politics at the University of Edinburgh. Her research examines how Scotland's violence against women and girls policies have evolved since devolution, taking an intersectional lens to explore these issues where survivors are represented. And Leah has also written about the UK's policy response to domestic abuse during COVID-19. Katie Horsburgh works at Zero Tolerance and to end men's violence against women and girls by tackling the root cause and gender inequality. She influences education, equality and human rights society, human rights policy, and supports frontline workers to embed gender equality. And Katie's work has recently focused the manosphere and protecting children from extreme misogyny. Tasrian Tasmaya, delighted to welcome you. And you're an MSYP for Edinburgh Northern and Leith, and a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament's Equalities, Human Rights and Social Security Committee. So as I said, there will be an opportunity later for you to ask questions of the panel and or make comments. And I'm just going to start by asking each of our panellists some opening questions. So if I can start with you, Leah, because you're sitting on my left-hand side. What do you believe is driving the current rise in misogynistic attitudes and behaviours, especially among young men and boys?
First of all, just say thank you very much for being here, and it's so good to see so many of you, and particularly young people in the front rows. So for me, I think I understand the rise of misogyny largely being driven by the rise of far-right populist and conservative movements. And I think it's really important to emphasise that these are not just in the UK or just in Scotland, that they're very much well connected across Europe and further afield. And that these movements are very much pushing for and perpetuating the subjugation of women and girls, particularly through an anti-feminist ideology. We can see backlash against gender equality policies. We can see this in relation to backsliding as well in policy. And these movements and the actors within them very much promote this kind of hatred towards women and towards girls, and very harmful ideologies around kind of entitlement, particularly to women and to sex, and the superiority of men. And I think we could see these everyday ideas perpetuate online spaces, so the increase in manosphere, which was mentioned in the introduction. So oftentimes actors like Andrew Tate, who are very popular amongst some boys in particular, who are driving these ideologies. And we can see these in our everyday discourses as well.
Thanks, Leah. Thank you for that. Tasrian, would you like to
I'd just like to say thank you for being here. And I think that gender inequality is what allowed these behaviours and attitudes to exist between young men and boys. I feel that there's been misogyny, young people have been facing misogyny for a while, but it's just that the issue has become highlighted now, because young girls throughout school, they face harassment, they don't feel safe, walking places, and it's just an issue that's been prevalent but has only been highlighted now. So I feel the rise of social media and the manosphere has been pushing it, but it's just been an issue that's been around for a while.
Thank you. Katie?
Yeah, I mean, we Zero Tolerance are absolutely in agreement that the manosphere and the rise of extreme misogyny is an extension of wider patriarchal attitudes and broader gender inequality that has existed for a long time. The particular risk is that algorithms promote more and more extreme content. A young man can start out looking for something perfectly reasonable, like how to get a girlfriend or a workout routine, and then really quickly be swept up in really extreme beliefs about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman and what women's place in the world is. So with tech companies profiting from those extreme views and the clicks that they get, it's no wonder that we're seeing those existing attitudes and the existing culture be made more extreme and have the volume turned up over time.
Thanks, Katie. Well, you know, really as a follow-on to what you've all said very well, Women's Aid recently felt compelled to issue a statement in light of the controlling and misogynistic behaviour and views expressed by some male contestants on the TV programme Love Island this summer. That kind of demonstrates a lot of what you've been saying. Does anyone want to make a comment? And I don't recall that having happened before, if anyone else does. Anyone want to comment?
So I will say I haven't watched Love Island this summer, but one of the reasons why I stopped watching it beyond, I suppose, being a bit older, is that this has happened before. So I think maybe 2022, 2023, so coercive control and behaviour, misogynistic attitudes towards other women contestants within the house. And I also think it's important to emphasise that it's not specific to Love Island. We see this in reality TV as well. So Married at First Sight was another one, both in the UK and in Australia, that there were contestants, male contestants, that were showing abusive and controlling behaviours towards their partners. So I think that the issue here is that it has been highlighted before, but yet there hasn't been much done, or at least on the surface that I can see, to address this issue. So I think, again, just as Katie said about social media, I think that TV programmes and those who run them have something to answer for, in the sense that the emphasis is very much increasing the viewership as opposed to protecting those who are on the programmes, and also the kind of misogynistic content that others viewers are seeing.
Yeah. Any other comments on that?
I also don't watch Love Island, so I can't comment on that situation specifically. But it's when programmes like that are organised on such gendered lines, where the men and women participating in the programme are seen as inherently really different and have different expectations and different activities to take part in, that's contributing to the idea that this is how a man should be and this is how a woman should be, which is creating the conducive context for the coercive control and abusive behaviour to happen. So it's no wonder that we can see that happening in the microcosm of a TV show, when in society it's those gender stereotypes and structural inequalities that also create the conducive context for violence against women and girls.
I think the reason they release a statement is just how powerful media can be in terms of addressing misogynistic attitudes. So if young people are seeing these attitudes towards women, they're going to feel it's normalised, and it's what we see in the media a lot of the times, like in the music we listen to, and it's something that's just become normalised. We've talked a lot about how in young adult media, they've become normalised to abusive behaviours towards women, and it's something that's become romanticised. And in terms of media, it can be used to spark the movement, in terms of the TV show Adolescent, which sparked the debate about gender-based violence. So which is why it's really important media has powerful representation about this movement, rather than doing the opposite and harming it.
Thank you. So it can be used for the good, to try and counteract the rest of it. So sort of moving on now, how effective do you think current government policies are in protecting women and girls from gender-based violence? And where are the biggest gaps? What do you think still needs to be done? I'll come to you first, Katie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've seen a lot of really encouraging progress in Scotland. Equally Safe is a world-leading strategy for preventing and responding to violence against women and girls. The biggest gap for me comes at the level of implementation. We're really good in Scotland at writing really ambitious strategies, and then we're not so good at funding and implementing them. So a lot of the funding that goes into Equally Safe goes into services, which is absolutely right. We really want services to be really well funded, but we need to see more investment in prevention, so that the strain on those services is reduced over time, and we start building that gender equal Scotland where everyone is free, equal and safe. To invest in prevention, it's going to look like, yes, the whole school approaches that we're seeing at the moment, yes, increased relationships and sexual health education, but we also need to see more focus on adults and the adult world. Young people are not a silver bullet to solve gender inequality, and to put that on young people's shoulders isn't reasonable or fair. We need to address structural gender equality across the whole of society and really have that cross-Scotland, cross-community, cross-family approach. And if we all do our little bit of prevention, we can end violence against women and girls, but it's a collective effort that takes sustained attention and investment.
Yeah, really good point. Leah, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so I agree with what Katie said in that Scotland often is seen as world leading, and that's a part of the reason why I got into the area of research that I do and why I got into academia, to kind of get at that question of how did we get here? So I think it's really important to emphasise that, you know, Scotland's approaches to violence against women and girls and gender-based violence is framing it as a cause and consequence of gender inequality, and that very much comes from feminist language and from the sector itself, who were able to influence policy from the very beginning. I think one area that there has been some challenges is in regards to intersectionality, so understanding how different structures of oppression, so racism, sexism, classism, ableism, how they interconnect with one another and can't be pulled apart. So sometimes I think we're quite good at understanding the kind of gendered aspect of violence against women and girls or gender-based violence, and less so the others. I also think another aspect which I'm quite interested in at the moment, so I've been doing a research project within gender with my colleague Professor Meryl Kenny at the University of Edinburgh on violence against women in politics, specifically in Scottish local authorities. And I think sometimes there's been an increased attention towards violence against women in politics and violence in politics more broadly at the kind of Westminster and Scottish Parliament levels, but less so the local dimension. So oftentimes councillors are people who live in their community, they shop in their community, they're often spoken to at the school gates, etc. But there's not necessarily that understanding perhaps from police or the existing structures and policies in place of those kind of local dimensions. So I think that's something that in the future there could be more focus on.
I agree on the point of how it's not intersectional. When it comes to gender-based violence, it's different to how each woman faces it, turning on their age, race, and that is not accounted for at all, which makes it really hard for it to be a good legal system. And I'm part of the Ending Gender-Based Violence campaign planning group for Scottish Youth Parliament, and that is what we talk about a lot, and what young people want to see is how it needs to be intersectional, and it needs to have gender mainstreaming, which means that all young people, everybody's views are in it, and it's not just fit for one person.
Thank you. That's a really good point. I mean, I'm mindful of Katie's comment about being a cultural, structural change, not just placed on the shoulders of young people. But I would like to maybe stick with you, Tajrian, and ask you, what role should the early years in schooling play in challenging misogynistic attitudes, and are current safeguarding and sex education policies adequate?
This is quite a big discussion in terms of planning our campaign, because we feel that the education provided is just a one-off thing. So for example, in schools we get MVP lessons, so mentors in violence prevention, but it's just something one-off, and I feel like schools see it as a tick box rather than being it something that schools children should actually engage with. And we want to see more intervention in earlier years, because we feel it's not talked about at all. And that is when the building blocks should really be made of how children should really know what's going on, but obviously in an age-appropriate language. But it's just something that is not talked about, and it should not be a one-off thing.
Yeah, no, really good point, Tajrian. Can I come back to social media now and ask your opinion on, what their role in trying to curb the spread of misogynistic content and influencers on the manosphere culture that's going on. I mean, are they doing enough? Could they be doing more? Leah?
So interestingly, in prep for this, I read Laura Bates' new book, The New Age of Sexism, which I think she's maybe talking this evening at the book festival, so I'd encourage you to go along to that. But the emphasis, I think, very much on social media and social media platforms and those who own them is to increase profits. So oftentimes what we see is that different forms of social media, or AI in particular, I think is a really big one, is put out without a consideration of the safety measures that are required, particularly for women and girls. And that's a case of that's something we'll think about later on. So I think social media platforms and those who own them play a real crucial role in both responding but preventing violence in the first place.
Good. Katie?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm listening to that book at the moment. I was listening to it on my way here this morning. But yeah, at Zero Tolerance, we did a piece of research last year called Many Good Men, where we commissioned Civic Digits, who are a creative youth work sort of company, to work with young people to understand their experiences of the manosphere and what they think are the causes and what should be done about it. We had two groups of young people working separately, a group of young men and a group of young women, and they had starkly different experiences of the online world. The young women that we worked with experienced extreme misogyny very regularly, but they were quite critical of it. They were aware of what it was, whereas the young men had never heard the term incel before, but were fans of Andrew Tate, knew what a Chad was, and seemed to be getting swept up in a lot of the language of the manosphere without knowing that that's what they were looking at. And in terms of the recommendations that report made, regulation of online platforms was absolutely one of them. We'd like to see really strong implementation of the Online Safety Act, but it wasn't the only recommendation. Whilst regulation is really, really important, and not to underestimate the importance of that, it needs to sit in the context of a broader prevention strategy where we're tackling those gender stereotypes and gender norms. So the things that we recommended were for better collaboration between schools and youth work so that young people have those safe, creative, non-judgmental spaces to explore what it means to be a young person, what it means to be a young man, to explore what masculinity means or what it could mean for them. And for statutory relationships and sexual health education, because again, that's not the only piece of the puzzle, but we know that implementation and rollout of sex education in Scotland at the moment is patchy at best. Not all young people are able to access it, and the quality of the content that they're accessing is very, very varied, which is leading young people to resort to Google, which is where they then get swept up in things. So it's having that broad strategy that the regulation of platforms can sit within so that it's the most effective.
That's really interesting. Tajrian?
I feel that when you're online, there's no consequences for what is said, and leads to young people thinking that that behavior could be acceptable if that's what they're seeing all the time. I feel that social media shouldn't be allowed to be pushing these harmful algorithms, and instead we young people want to see more influencers that are having a positive impact being pushed instead of harmful ones. And I feel that social media companies should be able to be held accountable if they are pushing these algorithms over actually supporting a positive cause and causing more harm. Because what young people can see online, in turn, they can feel that's how they feel internalized.
Can I just come in as
well? Of course.
I think one of the easiest things that companies, social media companies could do is to increase the diversity of their staff. Because what often happens is that it's dominated by white middle-class men, particularly in the global north, and the biases that are written into AI, that's written into algorithms. So I think that is potentially something that should be relatively easy for platforms to do. But of course, there needs to be regulation and various other things.
Yeah. So do you think that everyday sexism and sort of microaggressions, etc., actually do lead to much more extreme forms of gender-based violence?
Our research definitely showed that. So Firstly, we're standing on the shoulders of decades of research that shows us that violence against women and girls is more prevalent in societies which have greater levels of gender inequality. But to talk about the Many Good Men project specifically, it was a creative theatre project, so the young people were working to put together a play about the manosphere. And they were doing creative theatre exercises as part of that. And one of the prompts was act out a scene where a young man asks a young woman out on the date. Now, bear in mind that we had two groups of young people, young men and young women, working separately. And they both came up with pretty much the same scene without ever speaking to each other. So in the scene, young man asks young woman on date, she says no. Scene ends with a young man chasing the young woman down the street. And I find it frightening that both groups of young people, without talking, that was their version of what that kind of interaction should or could look like. The stark difference was that for the young women, when they acted out that scene, it was quite frightening. The tone on it was darker, whereas when the young men acted out that scene, they found it funny. So again, you know, our young people have a similar impression of what we're telling them about the world, about gender equality, about relationships, but vastly different experiences of it, depending on how they move through the world.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Tajreen, do you concur with that?
I feel if sexism and microaggressions aren't taken seriously, young women will feel like that the other extreme versions of gender-based violence won't be taken seriously either. As we can see, a lot of women and girls, they don't feel like they're safe to report, and there's a lot of stigma around it. Because if they're not being supported from the start, how can they feel they can be supported all the way through? And the idea of sexism, microaggression being something normalized can in turn lead to people thinking that more extreme cases of gender-based violence are accepted if just the start of it is normalized. And it's something that shouldn't be, women and girls shouldn't grow up feeling this way. And if they're not feeling empowered to take on the star issues of sexism, microaggression, how can they feel empowered to stop and prevent that other extreme versions?
Leah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just effectively to build upon what's already been said. So an academic, Liz Kelly, back in the 80s, coined the term the continuum of violence. And it's this understanding of how all the different forms of violence are interconnected by patriarchal structures. So you've got your everyday sexism, microaggressions, all the way up to more serious levels of sexual assault and rape. And again, it's this idea of the kind of normalization of, oh, it's just a joke. You know, you're I'm just having a laugh. And that this kind of creates this normalization of sexism, of misogyny, of violence, which perpetuates the more serious forms of violence. So I think when we're talking about it, it's important to see these interconnections and not kind of pull them apart.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really interesting. Sorry, did I cut in on you there?
In terms of women facing sexism and microaggressions, this can lead to them being scared of being in more underrepresented fields. Mm-hmm. For example, women in politics, they face microaggressions and sexism every day, which can lead to women feeling it's a place that they're not welcomed, and it's a place that they can't thrive in when really they should be there.
Yeah. Can I say with the, particularly at the kind of local government level as well, where representation is very low, I think 35% odds of women, and the project that we've been doing within gender very much highlights the kind of everyday levels of sexism, of microaggression within, you know, the chamber itself, you know, faced by other councillors. So it's very much this idea of if women are not made to feel comfortable in these places, then why would they enter politics in the first place? So that kind of added barrier to women's participation and women's representation in politics.
It's absolutely vital that we have that representation. So I mean, I'm of a generation where all that sort of banter and behaviour was normalised. I mean, all my working life have you know, experienced that. But I do find it really depressing that my granddaughters will now have to, you know, fight against that. And the only positive I take from it is that we're now talking about it. We're having discussions like this with young people, and we're not just accepting it to that degree, but it's very late in the day, because I'm going back to the 70s when I was working, and it was just part of it. And I think that's just crept up and led to the extreme levels, not helped, of course, by social media and other influences. No, that's really interesting. So can I ask you, what role do you think men should be playing in confronting misogyny? Because we now know this is not a women's problem. This is, you know, a societal problem and mainly caused by men. So I think we need to if we can get your impression of what role men should be playing in this to try and combat it. Leah, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that Daniel's not here today. He can talk about the work that he does in relation to rethinking masculinity with young boys and men. But I think men and boys play a crucial role, that by and large perpetrators of violence against women and girls are men. So I think there's something to be said there around kind of preventative measures, so thinking about primary prevention, so preventing violence from happening at the very beginning, all the way up to kind of tertiary prevention, so ensuring that perpetrators don't reoffend. But then I also think there's something to be said about bystanders. So those people who will not perpetuate or perpetrate violence, but yet might hear these jokes, what their responses are to men in those circles or to women in those circles of calling out, whether or not they feel they have the tools, the ability to do so. So I think there's definitely different roles in which men can play within this.
I think it's important that they are involved because I feel everybody needs to be involved in this. But also I think it's important when we discuss this issue that we don't use like toxic language when talking to them, because I feel it's important that they can feel that they are heard. And I think it's things like speaking about equal pay, employers who are able to do that, they should be implementing stuff. And also another issue is that men who speak about this, they'll be perceived as less of a man in their friend group sometimes, which I think it's important to understand that we need a safe space for young people and boys to come and speak about this.
Thank you. Katie?
Yeah, I think we can probably all agree that we want a Scotland that's safe for everyone, where everyone's free to be themselves, a Scotland where everyone can thrive. And to build that Scotland, everyone needs to be part of the solution, and there's a really important role for everyone to play. I think that it's absolutely correct that women are bearing the burden of inequality and of violence against women and girls. I also think that there's a huge amount of pressure on men to be a certain kind of man, to be strong, to push down their feelings, and so on and so forth. So it's about the role for men is in opening up those conversations with each other, checking in with your mates and seeing how they're doing and creating that safe environment where we can redefine what it means to be a man, and also calling out your mates when you need to, and taking away the context that allows that everyday sexism and the banter to go. And by doing that, you're helping create that Scotland for everyone, for your sister, for your mum, for your friends, that's fair. And fair for all of us.
I mean, it's just a basic human right to be respected and not to be living in fear. And I suppose the problem is, I mean, I once witnessed a particularly horrible sexist incident on a train against a female guard, and it was drunk football fans that were perpetuating it, and I was frightened to intervene, you know, and that's the problem. You know, I don't know what I could have done, but it was horrible, you know, and I should probably have gone right off the train and reported them at that time. But, you know, you're just so shocked when you hear those things. You just have to get rid of all that.
So I think there's also something about your own safety as well. Yeah. So whether or not you're the person to call it out, or if there perhaps were other men on the carriage, you know, I think
that's true.
Also figuring that out is important. You don't want to put yourself in an unsafe position. So it's
absolutely. So look, that's great. Thank you so much for you know, answering that sort of very broad range of questions. And I really would like now just to invite the audience to ask a question, to comment, and you can ask it to any member of the panel. And when I point to you, if you could just say who you are and then ask your question, I appreciate it. So I think girl in the third row there. No, I think that's sure. Yeah, sorry, you'll get a mic brought to you. So, yeah.
Something I was quite interested to ask, Kimberly, by the way, is obviously you mentioned about the Online Safety Act. And while it's great we're sort of blocking kids from getting access to the manosphere, that's theoretically fantastic. Is there not a big concern about things like subreddits, about sexual assault, about gender-based violence, about, #MeToo happened online? The normalization of these debates, especially if, let's be real, you're from a rural community, you're not in the big city, you're losing access to that. I mean, sexism hasn't just popped up because of the manosphere. So do you have something to say about that, I suppose?
Katie, absolutely. It's a really fine balance.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. She was asking about the balance with the Online Safety Act between regulating so that people don't get access to harmful content, but also making sure that people can access information about the Me Too movement. Is that a fair summary? No, you're fine. Absolutely fine. What I was going to say to that is that there's absolutely a really fine balance with the Online Safety Act and how it's implemented. I think one of the key things to note is that most of the restriction is about what children can access rather than what adults can access. There's a lot more freedom for adults to access whatever they need to. But absolutely, particularly for marginalised young people, the internet can be a lifeline for LGBT young people. Having access to online communities is a way to feel seen, heard, and feel like they belong. It's a tough balance, but I think that at the moment, Ofcom are working quite hard to try and get that balance right, and to make sure that we're, creating legislation or creating strategies that can keep up with the way that language is constantly changing and not misinterpreting discussion of, useful discussion about sex and relationships for something harmful that children shouldn't see. So yeah, agree, basically. It's a balance. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
Anyone else want to answer that? Or
No,
you're okay.
I think there's often balances, particularly when it comes to law as well. So freedom of speech is another one. So I think, and I'm not in any way a lawyer, but I think there often is this balance, and you hope that experts are able to kind of work it out, as you said, Ofcom.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to take a question from some of the young people in the front rows, if anyone's got something in mind they want to ask. I'm sure you must have something. I'll give you some time and have a wee think about what you want to ask, and we'll take another member of. Yes, lady there.
I would recommend, without reservation, a book for every person in this room to read if they have not already read it, by the journalist Marianne Sieghart, called The Authority Gap, which details all these issues. And there is, in fact, on the web, a Zoom event with her through the Royal Society of Arts, and that can easily be found online. But if I may, Chairman, put one question to you. I wonder why you didn't pull the communication cord and have the train stopped so that the football louts could be put off the train.
Good point. I wonder myself, but it didn't happen. So yeah, yeah. Yes, lady there.
I would like to know why there isn't misogyny isn't a hate crime in Scotland.
Anyone want to answer why misogyny isn't a hate crime?
I can't answer why it's not a hate crime, but I can talk about Zero Tolerance's sort of perspective on misogyny as a hate crime. We're aware that it's a challenging debate, but it's a debate that we'd really like to see happen. We were quite disappointed to see the misogyny bill dropped from the programme for government. And it's something that we're calling for in our work towards the next Scottish election, is to have the conversation about what it would look like to have a misogyny bill. So yeah, it's important.
In terms of our Ending Gender-Based Violence campaign, one of our priorities is making misogyny a hate crime, but we were faced with the issue that sometimes laws are not that intersectional and they're quite specific. But we feel like this is a law that has to be intersectional, as every woman's experience is different. And we have our manifesto coming up in which nearly 90% agreed of making misogyny a hate crime, which just shows that young people really want this. And this is something that we are pushing for from the Scottish Youth Parliament. And it has been favoured by a lot of young people. And it is definitely a priority of our campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it is proposed to be added into the hate crime as a characteristic now, but there is a lot more work to be done. I completely agree. Okay, anyone else who had their hand up? Lady in the green.
Could I ask the panel what they think about the rise in pornography, and particularly extreme pornography, and if that is contributing to the rise in misogyny?
Thank you. Leah.
Yeah, I think it's a massive concern. And I think it's something, even on platforms like X, so if you're not actively seeking it, so I know, like, as a feminist academic, that I'm not looking for this kind of content, but yet on my feed, I'm still seeing it. So I think that's a massive issue, that people who aren't looking for it are accessing it, you know, when they're not wanting to. But I think that it does play a role. I know, of course, there's a lot of debates around pornography, but I think that extreme forms of pornography does play into the kind of normalisation of entitlement to sex, and various other kind of harmful attitudes towards women, and particularly towards consent and sex.
Likewise, in our Many Good Men research, the young people themselves identified pornography as a risk factor for radicalisation. So they felt, the young people involved in our research anyway, felt quite strongly that the pornography that is out there is putting forward a particular view of relationships and sex and how those dynamics work, and in their view an unhealthy perspective. The young women in particular had experiences of being shown quite graphic, violent pornography against their consent, even in the classroom at school, which, you know, in my mind amounts to sexual harassment, to be being shown that kind of imagery without wanting to when you're trying to learn. So, yeah, our research certainly backs up what Leah was saying.
Tajin?
I think this just shows how media can play a role again. And at the Youth Parliament, we're wanting to see media and what's being out, more legislations on about it, rather than just being something that can be easily gotten away with, especially with these companies. And it just shows how there's just different forms of gender-based violence that we're just not even aware about, that aren't even talked about, but are aiding the movement.
Thank you, thanks. Can I ask any of the young people in the front rows and the girls in the front rows, are you feeling threatened by this at school? I'm not asking you to say anything personal, but just in a general sense, are you aware of it? Does it make you feel apprehensive, the fact that there's so much porn, and do you feel affected by it? Would anyone like to? Girl nodding your head, yeah? No? Yeah, no, feel free, just, yep, super.
I've become aware that, like, there's boys in my year, like, no, nobody specific, but there's boys in my year that I know that they think things, and I know that they might expect things from the girls, and that I know, like, they might be looking at stuff online, and not that it really makes me feel threatened, but it makes me aware of, like, I don't know how to word it, like, that one day they might abuse, like, their power and, like, hurt a woman, and, like, not now, but in the future they might hurt women, and I don't think the school really tries to stop it. I think they try and, like again, check boxes, rather than, like, really try and put it into their mind that...
Yeah. That was my next question to all of you. Would you think the schools are doing enough to make you feel safe and to combat the abuse of what you can see in your phones and how you're reacting? Do you think the schools could be doing more? And if so, what kind of things should they be doing? Anybody want to comment? Any of the boys want to speak up? Don't want to put anybody on the spot. Yes, boy behind.
Do you think women who post on OnlyFans make misogyny harder to battle? Do you think women who post on OnlyFans make misogyny harder to like battle and get rid of it?
So you're talking about women going on OnlyFans? Is that you?
Who actively post on it and stuff? Do you think it makes it worse?
Well, it's not for me to say. I don't know what the rest of you think about that. Anybody in the panel want to comment on OnlyFans and women participating in it? That's another form of pressure, I guess. But yeah. Okay. All right.
I can probably answer that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, obviously there will be exceptions to every case, but the culture of women posting on sites like OnlyFans, you know, it's probably a result of the social systems that we live in and the cultural narrative that's been created that's ushered in these kind of platforms for people to go and post their own things. And I also want to say that although in terms of OnlyFans, we tend to think of women using that platform to sell things, but it's open to any gender and anybody can use it. But we always felonize women, but if there was no demand for it, they wouldn't necessarily do that because it simply wouldn't be profitable. So it's a case of supply and demand. If no men are expecting it, are wanting it, are paying it, nobody's going to do it. It's basic economics in that sense.
That's a good point.
Yeah, can I also add one more thing? Is I mean, there's a lot in the world to be horrified by, and I'm interested to know what can we do as people, be you male, female, old or young, that can improve the situation in general for all of us now and for future generations, because like these students here, yeah, they're kids just now, but they're inheriting a world that we are creating today. So what can we do collectively to make that world as good and as better for them, and for them to pass on to the generation after them, rather than just be horrified by what we see in front of us?
Good point. Katie, I'm going to come to you because you kind of alluded to this earlier with the cultural aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really encouraging for you to hear you ask about what we can do, because as I said earlier, I think too often as adults we demonise young people or put them on a weird pedestal of being able to fix everything in this sort of abstract future that we can't possibly imagine. But actually the onus, as you say, is on us to do something. The good news is that there is a role for everyone to play in creating the safe, equal Scotland where everyone can thrive. For me, one of the biggest things that you can do is to think about your own role modelling and how you show up in the world. So thinking about making sure that everyone around you is particularly the young people around you, are able to see diverse and positive masculinities and femininities, different ways of being in the world, modelling respect in how we interact with each other, whether that's at home or at work, trying to find small ways of casually disrupting gender inequality. So thinking about what books or TV you are consuming and showing to other people and sharing with them. If you work in a space that has the public in it, thinking about what displays are on your wall and what role models are on those displays. Because if we do all those sort of small things, then gradually the whole environment starts to shift. And we have that expectation of equality. And if we pair that slow cultural change through all of our own small interactions with structural change and structural gender equality, then that should the evidence suggests, take away the conducive context for violence against women and radicalisation. It's in prevention for me happens in the small everyday actions, and every single one of us in this room has something that we can do about that.
Thank you.
I totally agree. I feel like it is very powerful having these conversations, such as putting down those misogynistic comments that are seen as jokes. But for me personally, I feel, coming from seldom heard backgrounds, these can be topics that are quite taboo and not talked about. And I feel in those backgrounds that they should be talked about more, being able to push those topics on and having really discussion when it can be such a taboo topic to even bring up.
Yeah.
I think there's also something for parents or carers of having conversations with younger people as well, particularly around social media usage. So I think sometimes parents don't necessarily know what's going on in their, the lives of the young people in regards to what they're seeing online. So I think it's having those conversations with them is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of those comments, and I think parents have a huge responsibility to. But I think young people act very much on learned behaviour. So if you see dad abusing mum, you might think that's normal, and it has to come that's never acceptable. Anyone else like to comment more generally? Yes. Sorry, I don't like pointing.
Just because you were mentioning parents just now, I was wondering, because there's so much there's a start of educating younger people through the education system and through schools, but I feel like so much also comes in the kind of behavior you see from your parents. And how do you reach parents to educate parents? Because when you're in school, you have people coming in doing talks, and you kind of have to learn about this. But how do you reach the older generations? Because I feel like there's talks like this, for example, but people who come here are interested in this. How do you reach the people who might not even know what misogyny is? How do you make this kind of something? Because I feel like that's something very important that does have a big influence.
I think that's a key point, actually. You've really hit it on the head there. Do you want to answer, Leah?
I don't have a concrete answer. I think a part of it, I suppose, is what Katie said about those kind of small changes, and perhaps having those conversations then open up other conversations. I don't know if there's kind of any resources Zero Tolerance provides, or any other organisations perhaps, but again, I think that's oftentimes people who are actively seeking that information. So yeah, I don't necessarily have a concrete, I don't know if either of you do.
Zero Tolerance has lots of resources available for anyone who's interested on things like gender equal play, so combating gender stereotypes with really young children. But those resources, as you say, are mostly targeted at early years settings and early years practitioners, because it's, as a very small charity, as in a team of fewer than 10 people for the whole of Scotland, it's much easier to go in at the institutional level. We're aware of parents as a key lever for change, particularly dads, because parents are an access point for a very wide range of adults. Parents are just people and workers and contributors to the economy. And then they also have young people that they influence. So it would allow us to access two audiences at once. But we're at the beginning, to be honest, of figuring out how we do that. We're hoping to pilot something with parents in the next year, and that it will be tiny, and then we will use that information to figure out how we could take this to more parents, and, as you say, communicate it in a way that is more gentle, and going in at the level of how can we make sure that every child is free, safe and equal, rather than talking about misogyny with people who've just had a baby, because it will seem really far away. So we're thinking about it. If you've got any ideas, really happy to hear them. But yeah, parents are key, and we're at the start of a journey of figuring out how to access them.
That's really encouraging to hear. Tajrin?
This is why it's also important to have all this awareness and education in primary school and early years, because if parents know what their children are learning about, they can realise that it is an issue and they can change their views.
Yep, thank you. I'm looking to the lady with the... Oh, young person. Yes, please. Go ahead.
So the kind of consensus that I've gotten from the four of you is that misogyny is what brings about the gender-based violence. So misogyny is what creates, like, that's how it happens, that's how it's brought about. But overall, since about the early 2000s, we've seen that violence rates have decreased. Would that be the same for gender-based violence, or is gender-based violence actually on the increase now that it's less action between, like, a man assaulting a man rather than a man assaulting a woman? And would that then mean that the misogyny is what's creating more gender-based violence, or as the decrease is going, the gender-based violence is increasing because they're like shifting their attention, so it's like changing up how it is? I don't know how correct that is, but I'm interested to hear like what you would say about that.
Thank you. Would you like to answer, Katie?
Yeah, I'll answer that. So you're right that when the Scottish Government published data about violence in general, we're seeing a decrease in violent crime in Scotland due to lots of great work from the Violence Reduction Unit and good investment in violence prevention. But recent statistics show that rape in Scotland is at the highest level since 1971, which will be a combination of increased reporting and also increased, or this, static levels with increased reporting of actual violence. So you're right to identify that there's a difference in how different types of violence are progressing in Scotland. And for me, the reason for that is to do with different amounts of attention and investment in different types of violence and a lack of alignment in the different strategies we have. So Equally Safe is Scotland's violence against women strategy. It's world leading, but is woefully underfunded. We also have the violence prevention framework, which has a lot of different programs in it. And I haven't compared the actual funding of them, but I imagine that between all the different projects that are going on in specifically the prevention space, there'll be more emphasis on preventing other types of violent crime. And certainly, we reviewed, at Zero Tolerance, we reviewed the violence prevention framework prior to publication and found that it didn't really align with Equally Safe. There wasn't much attention to the way that all forms of violence are gendered. You correctly identify that a lot of violent crime is perpetrated by men, but also experienced by men. And ideas of masculinity and what it means to be a man are really wrapped up in that statistic. So with a violence prevention framework that doesn't attend to gender inequality and masculinity, it's never going to be as successful as it could be, and also it's not going to mutually support Equally Safe in the way that it could. And if we saw that mutual support and policy coherence across multiple Scottish Government strategies, then we would likely see all forms of violence declining rather than as this lopsided statistics that you've pointed out. Does that answer your question? Anyone else?
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Thanks. Yeah, yeah. That was a really good question. Anyone else? With their hand up? Yes, Joe. Sorry, down at the front here. Thank you. Just a second row there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I feel like in terms of like school and stuff, as a young person, it's not that I feel like completely unsafe, but there's a lot of like instances where you can't help but like feel like in the future with like the rise of like technology and how it's like progressing, that misogyny is just going to get even more worse. Like there was an instance where there was a boy at our school, he was making like deep fakes, like pornography of like girls in our school. And I feel like knowing that that's like around, it just kind of like makes you feel even worse about misogyny, and it almost feels like it's sort of like regressing, like women are being treated as badly as they used to be. But I just wanted to ask like your thoughts on that, because I feel like it's quite a like prominent issue.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think what you're really saying is you feel it's out of your control, but I'm going to let the experts answer.
I think the issue of deepfakes is a massive issue, and I think it's one that's going to continue. Again, referring back to Laura Bates, just because it's fresh in my mind, she talks at length of this, so you might want to pick up that book. But she talks about the fact that oftentimes the emphasis in the public discourse and political discourse in relation to deepfakes is how it hampers or impacts upon elections, its impact on democracy, and less so on sexually explicit images. And what she writes in her book is that 96% of all deepfakes are sexually explicit, and these are largely of women and girls. So it is a massive issue. You might have seen in the news a couple of days ago that there was a man who was prosecuted for the very first time. I think it was one of the very first cases on deepfakes in Scotland. And what he did is that he got pictures of a former school friend from her Instagram where she was fully clothed, then used AI very quickly using a free AI software to then create a sexually explicit image of her in which she was in a state of undress, and then shared it with his friends. And I think the one thing that's really interesting, so there's new legislation that's come in at UK level in regards to creating and sharing and requesting deepfakes, although I do have a question about the extent to which that applies to Scotland. But I think the particular case that I mentioned, which really kind of shocked me, is that the Crown decided that there was no sexual element to that particular case. And it's something I find very confusing, the fact that, you know, academics, activists, those who've been affected by deepfakes, frame it as image-based sexual abuse. So I think that there's some kind of disconnect between those who are experiencing it and what the reality of it is, to the kind of laws and policies and even the political focus that we have on deepfakes. So I totally, you know, agree that is a massive issue, and I think one that's going to continue, particularly the fact that a lot of these softwares are free and it's really easy to use as well.
Yeah.
Going on the topic again, I feel like this is one of the reasons why the laws need to be intersectional, because again, each case is so different from one other, and we can't be just using the same approach. And in terms of education, we at the Parliament want to see teachers to be more highly trained. They should be calling out this behaviour and not letting it slide by, which I feel is happening in schools a lot right now. So I think it's really important for education to be implemented more and not just a one-off, and also for the laws to be more intersectional and not just be treated as a one-thing-fits-all.
Okay, good point. Anyone else who had their hand up? Oh, up at the back. Straight down in my eye line, down a bit. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a thank you on, you know, everything that you have already said, and I kind of wanted to ask the question on what you think we could bring back to our own personal school. I'm more thinking towards some of the younger year groups like S3 and S4, because this week we were part of Mental Violence Prevention, my personal school, and I think it was an amazing conversation starter. But for my personal experience, I think having it in some of the younger years could have prevented some of the experience I've had. And so I was just wondering some of the things that you think maybe we could bring back from your own personal experiences of what you've done that could maybe help that.
Thank you. Yes, Katie?
My really strong recommendation would be to ask or lobby your school to do the Equally Safe at School programme. So Equally Safe at School is a whole school approach to preventing and responding to gender-based violence. It's run by Rape Crisis Scotland. And because it's a whole school approach, rather than being a workshop that happens once or happens a few times, it's about embedding gender equality in every aspect of school life, from S1 right to S6. The way that it works is pupils or young people are involved in designing how it's run in the school. There's a website, feels like it's sort of downgrading it, like a platform that the school can create an account on and track all the different actions that it's doing to prevent gender-based violence, and it also supports teachers with how to respond. So by being that whole school approach, it's much more likely to be effective at prevention. As you say, it starts younger, and it's more about the everyday fabric, the everyday culture of the school environment. So I'd really encourage you to ask your head teacher very nicely / lobby them to look into that programme.
Can I just clarify, Katie, are you talking primary or secondary?
Equally Safe at School is secondary only at the moment. Yeah, primary schools, there is a bit of a gap there at the moment. Again, it's a gap that we at Zero Tolerance are interested in filling. You can look at the Gender 10 toolkit, which lays out whole school approach to gender equality for primary schools. There's also Scottish Government published the Gender-Based Violence in Schools framework, which is again a guidance document for how to do a whole school approach, and it applies to primaries as well as secondaries. So there are some options, they're just a bit less scaffolded at the moment.
Good, good. Okay, yes. That's you. Yep, you were low.
My question kind of revolves around social media and how it's kind of led to misogyny being able to evolve in a sense, where it's gotten to a point where maybe men from like a certain generation prior weren't exposed to it, so therefore misogyny comes in kind of a different form, and whether that's notable like in the actions that they display or the words that they use, and how much of an issue that actually is, and how it's all changed in such a short span of time.
Thank you. Leah, would you like to comment?
I think COVID is a particularly interesting time in which people perhaps who weren't online or weren't chronically online found themselves in these kind of online spaces, and particularly in relation to social media. So I think in relation particularly to violence against women in politics, we can see that. So people who perhaps previously wouldn't have engaged with kind of face-to-face violence are perpetuating this kind of online abuse. And then this goes for older generations as well, not just younger. So I do think there is something to be said there about social media and the usage of older people too, and not just younger people. So that's a really good point.
Could I add on as well? That you're right that the language of misogyny is changing really, really rapidly. The terms that older generations would have used to try to be sexist are different to the terms that people are using today to be sexist. But the base understanding of what it means to be a woman is the same between both. It's just different language to describe the same discrimination, if you see what I mean. What we also know is that whilst a lot of the online world sees young people and young men being swept up in misogyny, it's adult men who are driving those movements. Leah mentioned the far right earlier. They're extremely organised, and it's groups of adult men who are actively seeking out young men to try and bring them into their worldview. And it's a pipeline where sexist jokes are often the starting point of radicalisation. It becomes more and more extreme and eventually gets into far-right extremism and really racist discourse and stuff like that. So being aware that, yes, it's young people who are at risk of being swept up in that pipeline, but it's adult men who are doing the grooming and who are driving the movements. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Leah, but...
No, I do, I agree. And then added to that, the algorithms as well. I think very much understanding that misogyny is not one thing. It's connected to white supremacy, it's connected to anti-Semitism. So it's that kind of, once you're radicalised in a way, it's easy to then kind of go into other different spaces as well. And I think social media is just the perfect place for that to happen, unfortunately.
Oh, I think this is why it's important for when we decide policies that we include gender mainstreaming. So we look at how each policy affects gender-based violence, because really it's just not one policy that can stop it. We have to make sure that every policy looks at it and takes it into account with everybody's views.
Thank you, that was a good question. Yes, gentleman there. Know yourself with the black shirt, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a question maybe pointed at you, Rona, but then to others as well if they want to add in. Just thinking through about kind of future-proofing discussions around the evolving nature of misogyny and what that means in politics, and looking ahead to the election that's coming, we're going to see a lot of change, members coming in and out, and new people coming in, and just trying to think through the role that current MSPs, cross-party, have now to future-proof, to know that legislation's been passed, which is good, but the implementation's, much to be desired, needs more work. But just thinking through how do we make sure that we look beyond the party politics to ensure that like this is going forward? And so just to echo those discussions around what does it mean to have misogyny as a hate crime going forward, and what work needs to happen now to make sure that that doesn't kind of come towards later down the line as new MSPs get onboarded, that this should be hitting the ground running. So just thinking through the role that you're seeing cross-party to make that happen. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a difference. I was elected in 2016, and I've definitely seen a much greater awareness of, policies that have to be, mindful of gender equality coming. And I don't think we've moved fast enough. I think there's still a lot to do. But I do think we are at a space now where we are, we're very, very aware of that. And it's a very good point you make, because all types of legislation must have a gender element to it, in my opinion, because, women are very often affected by legislation. And I think that's something that, as I say, we're very mindful of. And I think for future candidates, coming up, they need to promote that in their bid to be elected. And when they are elected, from whatever party, they need to pursue that with the legislators, so that that it's not all talk, that things actually happen. And I share Katie's disappointment about the misogyny bill not coming through. But I think we'll get there, and I think, yes, I think I'm reasonably optimistic that things will get better. That's a good question. Someone right up at the back, in the middle of the row.
Hi, I just wanted to ask if, on your opinion, if you think that some men are too quick to blame women for misogyny, saying things like, oh, the clothes that she's wearing, or if she posts on OnlyFans saying, oh, she deserves it, and painting them as the villains somewhat, instead of being sympathetic with them and those men taking accountability for misogyny.
Thank you. Accountability for misogyny?
I mean, victim blaming is unfortunately still rife. We also still see it in our legal system as well, so it's not just individual men, on the grounds. And I think it is just a part of the patriarchal structures in which women are blamed often, as you said, for what they're wearing. That's often one of the first questions that are asked. Or that often the onus is put onto women and girls to protect themselves. So don't go out at night, don't walk somewhere where it's dark. As opposed to actually preventing violence from occurring in the very first place. So I do think we still need to shift that focus.
I think this is also another thing about putting the burden on women, when really it is not their fault and is something that should be collectively worked towards, such as putting blame on victims when really it's not them. It's just showing again that they expect women to fix all the problems, when really it's not them to fix.
Yeah, totally. The evidence shows that there's one cause of violence against women and girls, and that is gender inequality, and the way that it intersects with other forms of inequality and the denial of human rights. There's no evidence to the contrary. So, yeah, you're right, basically. Victim blaming should be less.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else? Gentleman at the end of the row.
Hi. As a white middle-class male, I'm not sure I should be saying too much here, but I do have a few points to make. I was pleased to hear if somebody finally brought up the subject of parents and parenting. When I was a young lad, like these young lads, it was the parents and the teachers that were our role models. And unless you can get to those guys, you're never going to get anywhere. You can have as many policies and procedures as you like, but you've got to get the parents and the teachers to start creating role models so these lads can follow them, yeah? My other issue is that we talk about misogyny. It's quite disappointing to see there are 4 women on the panel. If you could get a man up there who could talk about misogyny and maybe be a role model for some of these young lads, you might have a chance of some of this stuff getting through to them. But at the moment, personally, I don't think it's going to happen the way you're going. Anyway, just to conclude, we've talked about policies and procedures with the Scottish Government. Can you tell me, the lady on the left there, what practical steps the Scottish Government are taking to stop misogyny or to, yeah. Because I haven't been in Scotland for long, but I don't see too much happening in the public that would make me think, A, there's a problem, and B, the Scottish Government are trying to do something about it.
Well, we are very much trying to do so and have been implementing strategies. I think Katie outlined equally safe strategies, which has been successful to an extent. Could do with more funding, I agree. And there are, you know, educational programmes being put in. We're very, very aware of the climate. We're very aware of the way things seem to be going. And, you know, I think, going back to the other person's comment about, you know, making things happen and not just, you know, talking about things. I think we're at that stage now. I wish we'd started sooner, but we're very aware of it now. And just to clarify your point about there not being a man in the panel, there was to be a man here who had to call off ill at the last minute, unfortunately, and that would have given us a better balance, I agree.
I wonder why he called off. Yeah, so just to give you an example, I mean, I've just come back from Australia. There's a lot of advertising on the telly and in the public about violence against women and family violence. You know, and I actually thought that we were way ahead of the curve on that, but from what I've heard today, it sounds like we're not ahead of the curve at all. But that's just a good example. They're doing a lot of advertising on the TV and in the press about family violence.
We'd be doing that too, to be honest. It's just not on all the time, but we have had some successful, you know, campaigns against it, and one of them involved Police Scotland as well. It's called "Don't Be That Guy," and you know, it was successful as well. I mean, it's not enough. I get you, but we need to keep on, you know, upping the ante on it and making it happen, because it is. For the people in this room, it's really, really important that this doesn't go any further. Thank you.
I mean, would it be possible to ask some of these youngsters what influence their parents have on them? Because my experience was, it was my parents that taught me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't disagree with you, and we did raise that subject, and if any of them want to come in with a comment, you know, they can do that. Lady in the black. That's yeah.
Thank you. We've spoken a lot about schools and parents, but I'm wondering if there's anything different or specific that youth work organisations can do. Katie, I know that you mentioned that earlier and the link between that, and just wondering, and Tasreen, you have experience with youth work too, what would you like to see specifically from those institutions?
I think in our campaign as well, along with teachers, we want youth workers to be trained in terms of spreading awareness and education, because we feel that teachers and youth workers can be the building blocks for young children and can help them when they're really young and install it into them. Rather, if they have a situation at home, they do have positive role models if we make sure that teachers and youth workers have this training and make sure they employ it, and it's not something that is a tick box, which is currently right now.
Okay. Yes, lady. Next. Yeah. Oh. You be next.
Thank you. So I somewhat agree with the gentleman there just regarding it being taught in school. So from what you're saying, this is a moral problem. And just going back to my childhood, I feel that religion has fell away quite a lot in Scotland. When I used to attend public school, we said our prayers every morning, we said our prayers before we went home, we had frequent church visits. All of that sort of fell away now, and I believe that they were integral in teaching the morals in school children as well as parents. Although teachers are there as role models and support, they're there to educate the children, not on morals. That's usually down to the parents. I would also like to ask the question as well. This is obviously the rise of misogyny, but we are all aware that feminism is rising quite sharply as well. So is it going to be the same laws online to safeguard young males? Because there has been lots of comments online, such as all male fetuses should be aborted, kill all men. This is coming from a lot of feminist groups. So I would just like to know where the balance is going to be in there. And I don't really think it's fair, for white men, especially young children growing up in this society, feeling that they're worthless, or, that women fear them. So I do think there's got to be a better sort of balance struck there to be inclusive of female and male. We shouldn't have it as, you know, misogyny and feminism. We've got to start bringing them together rather than separating them. And I believe that's the only way that we're actually going to get round it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Bring it to the panel.
I think that everyone in this room would agree that it's important that everyone in Scotland is able to express their views and have their own beliefs. We agree that parents are a really important part of how we role model positive relationships for young people. We also know that role modelling of any adults is not the only part of prevention, and it's not the silver bullet. All of that attitude and culture work has to sit alongside structural change and structural gender equality. So ensuring that women are equal participants in the economy, that women have equal representation in decision making and places of power like the Parliament, as well as that social and cultural respect. The two have to work together or prevention won't be effective. The second part of the question was about feminism. Yeah. So again, as Zero Tolerance is a feminist organisation, and our view is that everyone should be safe, equal, free, and have a fair experience of Scotland where we can all thrive. And that's what feminism is about. It's about creating a better world for everyone, and a world where men can be themselves rather than having to be a strong version of a man. And if we all keep sharing that really positive messaging and explaining that, like, those are the values that we hold and that we welcome men into the conversation, then I hope that we can get further with prevention. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, adding on to that, I think it's important that we have a gender mainstreaming approach so that everybody is included in the conversation and that nobody's left out. And I also think it's really important for young men and boys to be involved in this conversation. It should be a conversation everybody is involved with and everybody's views are listened and taken accounted to.
I mean, the one thing I would just add is that patriarchy is harmful to men and boys as well, just as Katie was alluding to, that, you know, men, I feel that they have to be a certain way, that they can't be their authentic self. So I think it's really important to emphasise, at least my feminism and the conversation we've had here is very much inclusive in that it's not, you know, we're not trying to kind of put all the blame on men and then, you know, shift it round in many ways, but to emphasise that patriarchal structures only benefit a very small percentage of people and it's harmful to the majority.
Okay, folks, we're into our last 5 minutes. I did promise this lady here, so if we could get a few more questions in if they're nice and succinct. Yes.
Thank you. I believe some of the young people here might have heard Professor Danny Dorling this morning. I think one of the most important things he said was that the privileged groups in our very unequal society are naturally the ones who will feel most threatened at losing what they have. Now, we could talk about privilege in terms of class, colour, you know, a whole, and gender, obviously. And I think one of the reasons misogyny is rising is because young men who have occupied a fairly privileged position see themselves threatened by women who are looking for an equality there. I think what we need to do is, instead of falling for the kind of narrative that puts us against one another and looks for victims to blame, which we see happening all around us in the rise of the far right. It's not just happening with regards men and women, it's regarding immigrants and so on. We have to be kinder to one another. We have to stop looking for somebody to blame and address the real issues at the heart of this. And so I'm just wanting to conclude with a message. There is something we can all do. I was a bit horrified, Rona, when you said that on the train you didn't feel you could do anything. What you could do is just go alongside that person. Stand with them. You don't have to say anything, but we all know how horrible it feels when everybody else is attacking us. And for young girls, if you see somebody being made fun of, just go and be with them. Same for the young lads here. If you see somebody being picked on, instead of going off in a huddle and laughing with the others, stand with the victim. And we're all of us going to have to be much braver in the days ahead. Thank you.
Brilliant advice. Thank you. I'm not going to ask the panel to comment. Thank you for that. That was excellent. I'd rather just get in a few more questions, and there's a girl at the front down here.
Thanks. I was going to ask this earlier, but I wasn't sure if it was entirely relevant, but since someone else brought it into conversation, kind of going back to the basics, I was wondering, what do you think about the image of the feminism movement? Some people, particularly boys and sometimes young girls, I find, have the wrong perception of what feminism actually means, as in thinking that feminism is women thinking they are better than men rather than striving for equality. Do you think there is enough information to educate young men on what feminism actually means, and how do you think it can be improved? Also, what do you think, or do you think that in itself could be a decrease in misogyny?
Thank you. Good questions. Just very brief answers to that, really brief, and then I can get in, squeeze in a couple more.
What's really encouraging is that there's lots of research. So, for example, in Girl Guiding UK's Girls' Attitude Survey, that shows that more and more young women year on year are identifying as feminists. I think that's a really good thing. In terms of how we communicate with men, we know that there's more to do in how we share what the values of feminism actually mean. And in the interest of keeping it brief, Zero Tolerance will be publishing research. We just published research. You can find it on our website, about how to communicate with men and boys about feminism, about equality, in a way that uses universal human values. I'm sure that we can share it after, but it's our most recent research report on our website and has a lot of detail about how to do that.
Okay, thank you. That was a good question. I'm supposed to be asking you to sum up in 1 minute because we're just reached the end now. So I'll go to Tazria just to... If you want to just give us a summation of what we've been talking about and your key points.
So I feel for key points for the Scottish Youth Parliament is definitely make legislation more intersectional, and that includes making sure everybody is included in the conversation and everybody's views are taken account to. I think also we need to work on education and primary intervention, which we can start through by increasing awareness in earlier years and making sure that education in schools is not just a one-off, but something that's integrated and celebrated. I'm also really just grateful to be able to share my views of young people, and we at the Parliament feel that young people need to be included in the conversation when in terms of making decisions, because we feel that is our future and we are a group that haven't been heard a lot when in terms of, again, intersectionality, it's a completely different thing for young people and older women and just for everybody.
Thanks, Tazria. Leah?
Yeah, effectively echoing much of what you just said there. I think also the fact there's so many people in this room is really promising, that these conversations are being had and need to continue being had. I also echo the point around more intersectional approaches to the problem itself, to understand that this doesn't just affect particular groups of women. And I also think the importance of policies and approaches addressing the rise of AI, the rise of social media and what that means. And, you know, it was mentioned earlier about deepfakes and how there's potentially a disconnect between what's happening on the ground and our understanding and approaches towards it.
Yeah, I think would also echo everything else, but I think the problem of the rise of misogyny can often feel very frightening, and it can feel like a problem that's really, really big. But the good news is that we know how to solve it. We know that primary prevention, so those structural, cultural, attitudinal changes across society, structural changes on gender equality will create that Scotland where everyone can thrive and everyone is equal. And we all have a role to play in that. There's a small thing that all of us can do in our own behaviour, how we show up in the world, and also what we ask of our decision makers. And the people in this place to make that change and have a better, less misogynistic future.
Thank you. I think that sums it up perfectly, and I'm really sorry we have run out of time, and I'm sorry for those that wanted to ask a question and I couldn't get to them. And thank you all for coming along today and making such a great contribution. I know we could probably talk for another hour. I'd like to thank our panel, Dr. Leah McCabe, Katie Horsburgh and Tazria Tasmia, and our partners, University of Edinburgh. Can I remind everybody to complete our survey using your QR codes or ask the festival assistants for a paper copy if you need one, and we really appreciate your thoughts on how we could improve or expand on the festival. And there are lots of more festival events taking place today and tomorrow. These include a discussion on Gen Z and politics at 3 p.m. today. And at 5:30, we've in conversation with Maria Alukina from the Russian art protest group Pussy Riot. We also have a range of sessions taking place tomorrow, including a discussion on the big issues facing Holyrood 2026. And I do hope you'll be able to take part in some of them. So thank you all for coming. Safe journey back.